yes, the Boston Strangler, a classic whodunit. Not who you think it is, that's who. These are the top 5 things you need to know about the Boston Strangler. Number 5, the first murder. Typically, I like to start with the BM, not the bowel movement, the before murder of the killer that we're covering. But the Boston Strangler case is a little bit different. As you will learn, I'm not entirely certain the man who went away for these crimes was the Boston Strangler. Hoo-hoo, a juicy! Because all we know for sure are the details of the crime, that is where I'll start. The crimes began in and around Boston in the early 60s. Most of the victims were elderly women who lived alone, but a small group of women who were also included in the Boston Strangler case were much, much younger than the elderly women that were killed before them, which led many people to believe there were multiple Boston Stranglers. The string of murders started with 56-year-old Anna Slessors on June 14th, 1962. Originally, the police told Anna Slessors' son, who found her body, yikes, that this was a suicide. No, it wasn't. Her body was found naked, with her neck tied to the bathroom doorknob by her robe, which was fashioned into a bow. But even the casual Law & Order fan knows that that ain't no suicide. Her body was found in a very grotesque position that implies that it was moved post-mortem. This is her legs. One detail of this murder would become the strangler's signature, the noose tied into a bow. We'll see that over and over and over again. It was hard for the Boston PD to admit that they had a serial killer on their hands, so instead of looking into the crimes, they were negligent. And because of this negligence, we have all the conspiracy theories surrounding the Boston Strangler. Number 4, murder spree. The Boston Strangler's kill count came to 13 people. Here's a complete list of the murders under the Boston Strangler umbrella, and please notice the discrepancies in age as we fall down this Boston Strangler rabbit hole. Mary Mullen, 85, died of a heart attack. Nina Nichols, 68, sexually assaulted, strangled to death by her nylon stockings tied in a bow. Helen Blake, 65, sexually assaulted, strangled with her nylon stockings. Ida Erga, 75, sexually assaulted and strangled with hands because she was not wearing nylon stockings. Jane Sullivan, 67, sexually assaulted, strangled with her nylon stockings tied in a bow. Evelyn Corbin, 58, sexually assaulted, strangled with her nylon stockings. Mary Brown, 69, sexually assaulted, strangled, beaten, and stabbed. Now this is where we see a shift in victim demographic. Sophie Clark, 20 years old, sexually assaulted and strangled with her nylon stockings. Patricia Bissett, 23, strangled with her nylon stockings. Beverly Simons, 23, stabbed to death. Joanne Graff, 23, strangled with her nylon stockings. And finally, Mary Sullivan, 19, sexually assaulted and strangled with her nylon stockings. If the Boston Strangler was indeed one person, doubtful, how did the Boston PD not pick up on this person after 13 murders? Which led many people to believe there were multiple Boston Stranglers. Whoa. It's kind of like Doctor Who, but less whimsical and more death. Number 3, killer signatures. Here's what we know about the signatures of the Boston Strangler. He mostly attacks older women. He usually ties a bow around their necks with the material he used to strangle them, like robes and stockings and hands. This shows an incredible disdain towards women and human life in general. It isn't revolutionary to say that a serial killer doesn't value human life, but it is worth noting because, again, motivation. More than not, a killer who targets older women is trying to kill his or her mother by projecting her onto their victims. A murderer with mommy issues is nothing new. Hi, Ed Gein. Hi, Jeffrey Dahmer. Hi, Ted Bundy. Henry Lee Lucas. Eddie Cole. I could do this for a really long time is the point I'm making. And lastly, he ransacks the homes of his victims but doesn't take anything. There's a pretty obvious explanation to this. If you ransack the home, then the police will investigate a robbery turned violent rather than a serial killer with mommy issues. Knowing this about our killer, the man who was convicted of these crimes simply does not match the description. What's interesting about the succession of these murders is the sporadic young women thrown into the mix. With the other women, you see a slow and deliberate process and presentation, almost like they're following a script. Interesting. Number 2, the arrest. In October of 1964, a woman called the police after a man who was claiming to be a detective conned his way into her home. He tied her to the bed and sexually assaulted her while whispering, "I'm so sorry." Then don't do it. I don't get it. He then abruptly left, leaving her tied to the bed but still alive. This whole, "Oh, I'm so sorry, okay, you can live, I'm so sorry," is not exactly the Strangler's MO. Albert DeSalvo was arrested for this one incident. Upon his arrest, he confessed to breaking into the houses of and assaulting over 300 women. And it was only after his incarceration that he confessed to being the Boston Strangler. He recounted the Strangler killings in graphic detail. That was enough to convince the police. But no physical evidence outside the last assault was found to suggest that DeSalvo was indeed the Strangler. Here's an interesting piece of trivia that isn't trivial at all. A survivor of the Boston Strangler was invited to the prison to confirm DeSalvo's identity. They set her up in the prison surveillance room to organically point out DeSalvo. She didn't recognize him, but she did recognize his cellmate. Ba ba ba! A popular theory here, which is supported by professional psyche analysis, which I'll get into later, is that DeSalvo's cellmate coached him to confess to the Boston Strangler murders. But why would anyone confess to a crime they didn't commit, you may ask? Firstly, great question. Secondly, DeSalvo's motivation to commit crime was different than the Strangler's. Albert wanted fame and notoriety, whereas the Strangler wanted power and control, and also just to kill people. You can't kill people if you keep telling people about it, DeSalvo. I will say this, in 2013 they finally processed the DNA found on Mary Sullivan's corpse, and the DNA did prove an almost exact match to DeSalvo. But I will also say, DNA evidence 30 years later is less than reliable. And even if that DNA was DeSalvo's, that's not where the conspiracy ends. Just you wait a second. Number 1, multi-killer theory. Okay, here's where things get weird. Upon DeSalvo's confession, those closest to him expressed doubt that he could ever commit a murder, let alone 13 of them. As we saw in the crime that got him arrested, DeSalvo apologized profusely, which suggests that he isn't numb or accustomed to this. But the most damning testimony comes from the psychologist wherein DeSalvo was incarcerated. Medical director at the Bridgewood State Hospital, Dr. Ames Roby, insisted that DeSalvo was not the Strangler. Upon evaluation, Roby found that DeSalvo was a compulsive confessor who needed to be recognized. Same. Like I was talking about before, the Strangler's motive was never fame or infamy, but rather the kill itself. George Harrison, Anthony DeSalvo's fellow inmate, not the Beatle, claims that he heard a fellow inmate telling DeSalvo the details of the Boston Strangler murders so that he could confess to them later. Pretty damning, if I do say so myself. I mean, I trust George Harrison. John E. Douglas, a former FBI agent and one of the world's first criminal profilers, stated in his book, The Cases That Haunt Us, that he doubted that DeSalvo was the Boston Strangler based on the psychology of the murders themselves. Here's the other kicker. Mary Sullivan is widely regarded as the Boston Strangler's final victim. But the stranglings continued even after DeSalvo was convicted, which implies either accomplices or copycat murderers. The shame of all of this is the shoddy police work done on the front end of this saga. If the police weren't so quick to convict based solely on a confession, which, by the way, in 2017 is like nutter pants, would never happen, then we may have a concrete conclusion to this case. But alas, here we are, in the dark, just like always. We're born alone and we're gonna die alone. There's no real way to end this because there's no real end to this story, so I guess I'll just say, seems like teamwork makes the dream work. Thank you all so much for watching this. If you enjoy hanging out with me on Snarled, I have a strong feeling you might enjoy hanging out with me on our new gaming channel called Slaytrix. It's electric.